So one of the things that we have in Windows 10 that's important to users is the fact that when users log on to a Windows 10 computer, they can make their environment unique to them. They can set their wallpaper, their screensaver if they want. They can configure their color scheme. They also have things like their web browser favorites, their documents, videos, music, things that separate them from the other users. Now, you may remember from a previous lecture, we call this the user state. That's the stuff that's unique to them on a machine. Now, the user state containing all of their configuration documents on all that stuff is kept in this thing called a user profile. Now, by default, user profiles are known as local profiles. So when a user logs onto a machine for the very first time, they get what is known as a profile, a local profile. Now, if I open up File Explorer here and I go to my C drive, you're going to notice that I have a users folder right here. Okay. If I go into that users folder, you can see that there are different users that have logged onto this machine before. Okay. Instructor, administrator, admin. I've got a user named John Smith who's logged on. Okay. If I look at John Smith, this user, it makes me get permission to it. So I just hit continue to do that. This is their profile. These are their settings. Okay. Or his settings in this case. If I was to go to this desktop folder and put something on his desktop, it would show up. Just like right now, if I go over to this instructor account, which is the one I'm logged on to, and I create a text document that says, hey, as you can see, that shows up on my desktop. So I'm interacting directly with my profile through that. And if I wanted to put something on a user's desktop, that's one way I could do it. Now, I did want to point out, if I had a new user who logged onto this machine, like let's say Jane Doe, who was a user I created in the domain earlier. If Jane Doe was to log onto this machine right now, Jane Doe does not have a profile. So the question is, where does Jane Doe's profile come from? Okay, so to show you that, I'm going to go to this view menu here, and I'm going to click the hidden items checkbox. And I want you to notice that when I do that, something shows up on my screen. Okay, I get a, let me zoom in on that for you. I get a feature here, or basically a folder here called default. You see that default folder? All right. So the default folder shows up, and from there I have the ability to go in there and anything I do to this default folder, anything I do to the default folder is going to affect new users when they log on. Okay, so if Jane Doe logged on for the first time, Jane Doe is going to get this stuff here. This is going to be the default profile info for Jane Doe. If I was to go into this desktop folder here, and I was to create a folder called Welcome Kit for new employees, and let's say there was some documents in there for them to read, all my new users that have not logged on to this computer before would get this folder on their desktop on this computer. Okay, so Jane Doe or anybody else that was to log on would get this folder. Okay, so that's how this default works. Anything you do here is going to affect new users. Okay, now what if I wanted to do something that affected all users that use this machine? I have a folder here called public. I'm going to go into that folder, and anything I do to public is going to affect all users. For example, if I go into public desktop right now and I create a folder called company handbook, maybe it's got the company handbook in it, notice that folder shows up on my desktop. Okay, so everybody's going to be affected by that. Okay, now you remember in an earlier lecture we talked about the registry. So there is an area of the registry that involves the current user. Each user who logs on has a special area of the registry. John Smith, for example, this file right here, intuser.dat, every user has a file called intuser.dat. That's the registry. That's the current user registry area. When a user logs on, that gets loaded up into memory. Okay, oddly enough, I can make this profile mandatory by renaming this file to intuser.man. It's kind of weird. You'd think it'd be a checkbox, but it's just a rename. You rename the file to intuser.man. If I was to do that, then John Smith cannot change his profile. At that point, he can't delete things off his desktop. He can't change his wallpaper. He can't do any of that. There's two ways actually to make something mandatory where somebody can't change anything. You can change this file to intuser.man, or you can make this user what is called a guest. If the user is a member of a group called the guest group, then they cannot change their profile at that point. Okay, so that's what renaming it to ntuser.dat would do for you. Okay, now what if I wanted to make it where my user can jump around the different machines and their documents and stuff, their desktops, screensaver, wallpaper, all that, follow them wherever they go. Now that's called a roaming profile. Okay, there's another way to do it known as user experience virtualization as well. So if I wanted to do a roaming profile though, I'm going to jump over to my domain controller for this. So I'm going to pop over to that. Here's my domain controller, NYC DC1. I'm going to go to Tools, and I'm going to go to Active Directory Users and Computers, and then I would do this, whatever user I want to do this to, I'm going to pick that particular user. So if I wanted to do this to Jane Doe, I would need to go to Jane Doe, and I would configure Jane Doe's user account. All right, so just waiting on Active Directory here to show up. Okay, here we are in Active Directory. So if I go here, we got Jane Doe over here. This is the New York OU. Remember, an OU is an organizational unit, which is essentially a container that can contain different objects. You can put user accounts and computers in there, and you can assign group policies to it, as we saw, all that good stuff. So looking over here at this this users container, all right, you're going to see once it populates, you're going to see that we have some users that we've created. All right. So here we are looking at Jane Doe here. I'm going to double click on Jane Doe. If I wanted Jane Doe to have a roaming profile, what I'm going to do is go here to Jane Doe, and I'm going to click on, I just double click Jane Doe, and I'm going to click the profile tab. If this profile path is empty, then that means that she's just going to have a local profile. But if I wanted her to have a roaming profile, I can create a shared folder on a server. Okay, we know how to build shared folders. We've done that before. And then I could put a UNC path here, a Universal Naming Convention path, which is / the name of the server where the share is. Let's say that we had a share on NYC-server1, and we'll say that the path is the /profiles path, and then and then you could just put the name Jane Doe or whatever, but most people will put this variable called the %username % variable. Let me zoom in on that so you can see that a little clearer. All right, so %username %, you can see that there. %username %. What does %username % really mean? It just simply means that it's just going to populate that area with the person's username. Whatever the person's username is, it's going to populate it with that. This is great if you're copying accounts, because when you copy an account and you name the account, it'll just populate this area with that person's name. So each person gets a unique area. So this is how you make it a roaming profile. That means that if I did that with Jane Doe, and Jane Doe's jumping around to different computers and all that, Jane Doe at that point would be able to essentially have her profile follow her wherever she goes. Okay. Some of the other things I could do here under Jane Doe's properties, if I wanted to, is I could control the time of day that Jane Doe can log on to. I can control the computers she can log on to. If I click on this account tab, I can do that right here. Log on hours. If it's blue, she's allowed to log in. If it's white, she's not. If I clicked blocked out Sunday, for example, she can't log in on Sunday. If I blocked out Saturday, she can't log in on Saturday. I could set the hours before when she can log in, and the hours how late she could be logged in. So I can control all that with this. I can also control what computer she can log on to here if I want. So those are some neat little settings that pair very well if you're working with profiles. I can also set her account to expire if maybe she was a temp employee or something if I wanted to. So those are some of the other things you can do there. All right. But hopefully that gives you a good understanding of the concept of profiles, what a mandatory profile is, local profile, as well as a roaming profile.